All right, past leg grapevine, a primary ride that we've taught for years is leg hook ride, or bulldog ride as it's sometimes called. There are many opportunities to hook a leg, and leg hook is an effective means of controlling your opponent. What you want to do is not just cover the leg, which is a mistake, but actually hook the leg using back hoe action with your heel. Hook it, and that secures the leg. If you're going to when you have a leg hooked, secured, do not provide opponent with opportunities he does not deserve. For example, by reaching across diagonally for a far wrist or far arm. You make yourself vulnerable to near roll action. Okay? Do not place your head behind or up on top of opponent when reaching for a far ankle, particularly if you have his near arm looped. To do so is to make yourself vulnerable to both an inside drag or a back switch to the inside. Same type of action. Do not let opponent pivot in, unless it is a case where you feel able to control and counter such movement. For example, you might allow a slow pivot in to set up an RC. But what you really want to do in most cases is balance yourself, not put yourself in jeopardy. So you push on his near arm, keeping your thumb behind, and you circle his near foot toward you to prevent any pivoting. When you have leg hook ride on your opponent, do not let him execute any sort of a far roll. If you sense he might be apt to attempt a far roll, don't wrap your arm too deeply around his waist, and be ready to sprawl your free leg back a bit so he couldn't execute a far roll. Sprawl leg and loosen on the waist. Sprawl that leg a little further back. That's it. Do not let opponent counterhook your free foot so that he can hip inward and perhaps secure a switch or a leg over cradle if your balance were to crumble. Keep your free foot a safe distance away if possible, or at least try to shift it out of reach when you sense a counterhook coming. Only good balance can save if he secures the counterhook and hips inward. Now, from a more aggressive standpoint, when you're riding with a leg hook ride, not just worrying about some of the counter moves the opponent might attempt, if he steps up on his outside foot, you've got two basic options. Number one, you might move diagonally up onto him, where you can get collar and knee, and execute a rollover cradle. Or, if you have him in a leg hook ride and he steps up on that outside foot, you might take him backward into Navy ride. You want to realize that opponent need not actually rise to a standing position to be vulnerable to a backward dump to Navy ride. He merely must step his outside foot up forward some, and to position yourself, you may have to circle his hook foot toward you a bit. If opponent cares to rise fully toward a stand-up versus leg hook, accommodate him only to the degree of setting him up for the backward dump to Navy ride. Timing is of the essence. Don't try to take opponent to Navy too soon. Let him rise a bit. Try to get opponent to help you, that is, to create sufficient momentum for the dump. Generally, you want to dump opponent after you've offered him some slight resistance, and you want to do it at the optimal moment. That is, change the direction of your force, dumping him backward after resisting his rise a bit. Leg hook in and of itself is not a pin grip, but it can be and should be a control method which leads up to some pin grip, chosen by yourself or dictated by opponent's reaction to the leg hook or reaction to your selection. Some pin grip considerations via leg hook are, and we're going to do several. The first one we'll do is three-quarter Nelson. On a three-quarter Nelson, you get the three-quarter grip, pull the head down toward his knee, toward your own body, and circle the leg that you have hooked to get him into a tuck position, into a pin grip. And then there's what we call gazone three-quarter Nelson. On the gazone 3/4 Nelson, if you get the 3/4 Nelson grip and your opponent is smart, he'll lunge out to the front and get his head up. So you bring his trap leg to the side, so you can do a little high leg over and get your knee under his heel, and then walk your feet all the way around to the front to get him in that tuck position where he'd be pinned. As a third selection off leg hook, you can do what we call an arm mangle, where you attack the near arm with two of your arms, try to break them down. And then as a sample is what you could do from here, we'll do a hip underarm pry. We'll go through the details of it another time, but in slow motion, you would uncover that leg, put his hand up on your hip, get a wrist bar or underhook on the far side, and run your feet to the front to get your knee on the other side of his head. And then hook his arm, sit through a little bit, and create agony for your opponent. Another selection from leg hook ride would be fish hook series. You have a leg hooked, and he gets into a bear stand-up position. He goes up into a bear stand-up position. Sometimes you'll want to let go of the waist and wrap the near leg. With your waist strap arm, you wrap the near leg, and then hook the arm, cover the arm, and then sweep it back and get a fish hook grip. And once you get the fish hook, there's a whole series of moves that you can do off a fish hook grip that will put opponent on his back. As still another possibility from leg hook, leading up to pin grips. If you have the leg hooked and you see that the opponent's near arm is straight, you can slide your hand down his arm, put head in the armpit, and get what we call wrist back. Break him down to his stomach, to his hip, and there's a whole series of movements you can do off a wrist back grip. One of the more basic items demonstrated earlier and demonstrated again now is to take your opponent to Navy. That is, push on his near arm. Push on the near arm with your thumb behind. Circle his foot toward you. When he tries to force his way up into a stand-up, you resist it, you resist it, you resist it. And then when he gives enough oomph to get up, you take and make use of that momentum and dump him to the rear. Knock him down, but you don't fall to your own hip. You maintain your base. And you have Navy, and Navy leads to pin grips. And then also, if ever you're taking a man back to Navy and he makes the crucial error of rotating in toward you as you take him back, as you dump him backwards, if he rotates in toward you, he's made a crucial mistake. You can go after what we call ideal RC. It's a reverse cradle grip where you have the bottom leg. That's why we call it ideal. One more time on the take to Navy, where the opponent rotates in and makes the critical error of coming in toward you, where you can get him in a reverse cradle grip. Just go up over the top, get either a half Nelson or a false half Nelson, and put him in RC, which will almost definitely, against most opponents anyway, pin him. You've also got far side rollover cradle, which we demonstrated earlier and we'll demonstrate again. If your opponent steps up on his outside foot, you can shift weight up onto his body so you can wrap collar and knee and then roll him to the rear, to the side rear. So don't roll down a leg and injure him, take him to the side rear and put him in a pin. If he happens to go for a whizzer, windmill his arm back for a whizzer. As he comes back for that whizzer, you go down and get ankle, laces, body him to break him down and go after deep false half. And then unhook the leg and go for a full pin grip. Forearm and chance for a tight pin grip. And as another thought, when you have him in leg hook and want to get him on his back, you want to take advantage of an opportunity, if your opponent goes for an inside drag or a back switch type movement to the inside, what you can do is anticipate it, perhaps be able to step across him and get him in double grade. So if he starts inside against an arm loop and starts to drag you, what you do is you step across him and get him in double grade. And because boots, that is grapevine, in particular leads to pin grips, and if you're good with a leg grapevine, to get from a leg hook to a leg grapevine, we want to face this other direction now, to get from leg hook to leg grapevine, as you push on the arm and circle the foot, if your opponent stretches his leg to take pressure off his knee, you can move up onto him and slip into a grape, let the leg hook slip out. And then you've got all the different pin grips that you could apply from grapevine. As another method for getting opponent into Navy, another possible way, if your opponent happens to stand on the whistle, inside foot to outside hand, while you're going for far ankle and waist, if he pivots weight onto that outside foot as he should, you maintain your grip on the waist and you circle around to the side, getting a perpendicular position, and then you use the waist grip, the grip on the heel, and your neck strength to pick up and dump into the rear, and you'll get Navy ride. Now, once you have them in Navy ride, some of the basics real quickly. You want to keep your forearm perpendicular to your opponent's body axis, so he can't rotate. You want to keep your elbow down pretty close to the mat, so your arm doesn't get hyperextended if he rotates. You also want to grab the leg slightly above the knee. Now, when time comes for actually lifting, you want to rear back, get your head up, bring your hand toward your corresponding shoulder as if you were making a bicep. Once you get your opponent sufficiently rotated, then you want to bring your elbow up toward the ceiling so that he can't rotate away from you. And we're now going to do a little series of moves that involve the Navy lift that put the opponent on his back. The number one thing we're looking for is to rotate him sufficiently that we can snake a hand in and get reverse Nelson. And then we pounce on him to close that little opening between his body and ours so he can't elude the Nelson. The second part of the Navy lift pin drill is we rotate him and he decides to rotate more. As he rotates in toward us, he has his hand in the air. We go after a standard half Nelson. Again, pounce on him, close the opening so he can't slip a hand through to elude that Nelson. The third part of the pin drill, this time we've done Navy lift, we've gotten our elbow in the air, and he's rotating in toward us, but he's well trained. He doesn't keep his hand in the air when he's coming off his back. He has his hand in tight to his body. We apply what's called a false half Nelson. We just wrap the collar, let go of the knee that we have, grab the other knee, and lock our hands and get what we call ideal RC. And the fourth and last part of this Navy lift drill comes off that previous move that we just did, the ideal RC attempt. This time, when we lift, the opponent rotates in toward us, but he rotates in and we get the reverse Nelson and the knee. And this time, to prevent us from locking hands to get the ideal RC, he takes his arm and wraps it up over our back. That would give him enough leverage to perhaps prevent us from locking hands and getting the RC. So what we do is we change off to what's called a nags. We overhook his arm, somewhat like a wizard grip, and then we bring our knee to the other side of his head. As soon as we get there, we lock hands, and we get what's called an inverted reverse headlock. And it doesn't look like much, but it is a very devastating pin grip. It's very tough to avoid getting pinned once you get caught in this grip. So one more time, the Navy lift and the pin grips that can follow from it. All right, on this second run-through of that Navy lift series, again, we raise that leg up, rearing our own upper body upward as if we're making a bicep, getting our elbow to the ceiling, and we're trying to create an opportunity where we can snake our hand in and get reverse Nelson, and then pounce. That's item number one. Item number two, we do the same lift, the same sort of attempt at rotating him, but he wants to rotate a little more than we wanted him to. And as he comes inward, hand in the air, we insert a half Nelson and pounce. As a third possibility, when he rotates inward against our Navy lift attempt, he keeps his hand close to his body as a well-trained wrestler should. We insert what's called a false half and let go of the top knee, grab the other knee, and lock our hands and get a cradle. That's on that final item, that third item, previous item, that as he rotates inward, if he senses that we're after that cradle, he may wrap his arm up on our back to attempt to prevent it, and he may be able to prevent it with that arm up there, but we change off. It's always something that you want to go to. Next move, next move, next move. And we overhook that arm, wizard-type grip. We bring our knee to the other side of the head to trap his arm, and then we apply what's called an inverted reverse headlock. And again, doesn't look like much, but it's a very potent grip, very hard for the bottom man to get off his back to avoid a pin. He's stuck there. All right, what we're going to do now is cover some movements against various slip moves. We're going to first work against the crawl. First thing we say is that we don't want to give the opponent the position necessary for a crawl. For example, we don't want to, if an opponent sits out, we don't want to drape an arm over his shoulder. That gives him the opportunity to initiate the crawl action. Also, we want to avoid putting a cradle, a side cradle on from the rear. If an opponent sits out and we apply a side cradle from the rear, we make ourselves vulnerable to a crawl. So we wouldn't want to do that. Also, we want to execute well any move that, if poorly executed, would enable opponent to apply an effective crawl. For example, on a loose bar, we want to pull him straight toward his back. If you had all let him to rotate away from you, he could initiate the crawl action. And if you're able to anticipate a crawl coming, just as the opponent sticks his arm under yours to get started, you pre-act. You either execute a loose bar, or instead of a loose bar, perhaps you could execute a back rub to a quick pan action. If opponent has already initiated crawl action, then you look to circle and cover his legs, if that be possible. If you don't want to leap up on his back because you're liable to fall off and go under. And finally, if opponent, despite your best effort to thwart, would succeed with his crawl action, you circle to the front, that is away from his legs, and give him a neutral. And then get ready to avoid a drag follow-up. You have to be ready to block any drag follow-up he might apply after completing his crawl. Another prime time when inside drag is possible is when the opponent is prone on his stomach and you're trying to get a tight bar grip, or you actually do secure a tight bar grip, and he starts his inside drag action. As he starts it, if you can cover him with the near leg, rather than wait, get into position for a high leg over, covering him with the near leg will block off the drag. So drags are blocked by head across, arm across, one leg across, or the other leg across. You've got to get something across him to stop, block, or counter the drag. Another thought against inside drag bypass is if the opponent does get the inside drag position, just as he's reaching that position, sprawl the near leg way back low so he can't get a good hamstring grip to drive you to your head, enable himself to slip out from under. Once you've accomplished the feat of sprawling that one leg back, then what you want to do is either work your elbow between bodies to get your arm across his body, or if that's not possible, then do a step across. Work your leg up high and across, and counter move his arm drag attempt at that point by that method. All right, we're going to demonstrate an old-fashioned out-the-back door move against the far ankle and waist strike. The man on bottom is going to go for an inside switch movement and cover the far leg. And then he's going to go down on his side and reach around and get the foot in two hands and work his way out the back door. in slow motion here, because it's not a move that can be done very quickly. And as he squirms out of there, he'll rise to his knees and he'll get his 2-point reversal. Anytime a man is doing any sort of out the back door move, if possible, the man that's having it done to him should scramble into a stand-up so as to allow but 1 point rather than be reversed for 2. Or even sometimes it may be possible to scramble or squirm in such a manner as to be able to retain control. But whatever, don't rack up a leg in the process of scrambling. Better to give the opponent a point, even 2 points. If an out-the-back door move will in fact bring a reversal for opponent, don't resist the inevitable. Concede the reversal and allow yourself time to get the point or points back in the period. Clinging eats up the clock and may lead to your getting very tied up once opponent finally succeeds in his reversal attempt. Wisely judge all circumstance always when you're out there in a mat wrestling. All right, against slip of the half Nelson. Number one thing is you want to not make yourself vulnerable to the slip of the half. And one thing you can do is try to ensure that you'll be able to step off the opponent's legs so you can come to the side and complete your half Nelson. To ensure that you can do that, you use your feet. You take your instep and put it across his legs so that you'll be able to step to your left. And the opponent will not be able to block that step off by raising his leg. And if you wanted to go to the other side to shoot a half Nelson on the other side, you bring your other instep across his legs so that the opponent's raising of a leg will not block you from stepping off. Whereas if you were straddling both his legs, he could raise a leg up in the air to prevent you from stepping one way or the other. And so you want to use your own feet as blocks, use your insteps as blocks to the opponent's block of your stepping off his legs to get to the side for the half Nelson. Far half Nelson, generally unwise, but it is permissible provided you have a sufficiently firm wrist bar on the near side, or tight bar on the near side, or a wrist back on the near side, whereby he would not be able to slip the half if he tried. You have to have a strong grip on that near side, otherwise far half Nelson could get you in trouble. That is, enable the opponent to slip the half Nelson. Against slip of the half, it's also possible to at times do some of the more exotic moves. But before we actually go to the exotic, we're going to do a wrist bar and half Nelson grip from crab ride and put the opponent on his back. And at this point, he's not going to be slipping the half, not on this one. So we post our head, we do a step across, and work for a fall. Well, in the process of executing such a move, the opponent might get the idea to attempt to slip the half. If he does attempt to slip the half and you lose your grip on the wrist bar, you might be able to step across into a double grape and catch him with the double grape. Or if think in terms of the more exotic, and you're capable at the exotic, what you might be able to do as he attempts to slip the half is lift him diagonally across your body and put him up into a stack position and get the grip on his arms that we call screaming. Okay. We'll do that one more time where we are attempting our wrist bar and half Nelson from a crab ride position, and the opponent attempting a slip of the half. And what we do is we lift them diagonally across our body up into a stacked position, and as he goes into that stacked position, we continue to rotate our body and sit through and get him in what we call a screamer pin grip, which is very effective in pinning. Stand-up is since stand-up is the primary escape move for most people, stand-up blocks and counters have to be learned. Perhaps the number one item would be to learn ankle rides. On the whistle, if an opponent is anticipated to stand up, you might go for far ankle and waist, for example. Or you might go for near ankle and waist. If you're going to grab opponent's ankle at the whistle, you want to conceal your intent somewhat. Don't overtly take a look as to where the target foot or instep is aligned. Once the target foot or instep is in hand, be aggressive. Press into opponent with your upper body and pick his foot up off the mat a bit. Particularly drive and pick up if opponent is attempting to pivot weight onto the foot that's in your hand. That is, drive his weight forward off his foot so that the foot can be lifted. Now we're going to have the bottom man here step up inside foot to outside hand while we have far ankle and waist. And as he pivots weight onto his back foot, what we have to do is circle to the side to get ourselves in heel pick position, and we'll simulate a heel pick. It would lead to Navy ride, but we're not going to finish the move. And if in this sort of position you felt that you weren't going to be able to execute the heel pick, as a last resort, you could change off to a leg lock, that is, lock on a single leg, and then you would proceed from there to complete single leg head in. With any completion, it would work. Opponent succeeds. Stop right. Second thought against stand-up attempts is chopping the opponent. There are two types of chop, near chop and far chop. Near chop is the primary, far chop is merely a change of pace. We'll demonstrate a near chop here and attach some words to the doing. With regard to a near chop, your chest drives opponent forward at the point of contact, the upper middle of his back, with your waist strap arms performing auxiliary duty in the driving forward and major duty in controlling the opponent. You want to bring your outside knee into opponent's rump as a follow-through and as a guard against slip or step over. And you want to slip your thumb around in front of opponent's near arm so that switch is blocked, and so that his arm can be swept diagonally across under him to where a reach-around wrist grip can be secured. Always when chopping, you want to beware of a switch, which can be very effective versus an anticipated chop. If you are unsuccessful, we'll just give a slight demonstration of far chop, which is simply a change-off move from near chop. On far chop, you move diagonally across opponent and get the other arm and wrap arm around the waist, your free arm around the waist, and chop them on the far side. The worry you have on far chop is a quick elevator. Opponent could go with you and attempt an elevator to get you off balance. In review of a couple of things that have already been mentioned, when you're attempting a near chop, you have to be careful that the opponent doesn't hit a quick switch. You'll be a little bit vulnerable if you don't cover his leg there and bump him and be real aggressive and loop the near arm and prevent that switch from occurring. And if you're going across his body for a far chop, you'll be in straddle position momentarily, and opponent can go to his shoulder, raise his foot in the air, and elevate you to get you off balance. And then he would sit up and scramble and see if he couldn't get some points off you. So you have to know what the opponent could possibly do and be wary of his doings. Also against stand-up, cradles can be very effective. If an opponent steps up on his near foot, but doesn't come all the way and or doesn't get his head away from his knee, you sometimes can slap on an inside cradle, switch your feet to the outside, and rock him backward with just enough force to get him to his back, not so much force that he could flip through. Or if he steps up with outside foot into a tripod type stand-up, you can shift your weight up onto his back, wrap a collar and knee, and do a rollover cradle to the rear, the side rear. Or if he is a person that happens to prefer backup type stand-up, where he walks his hands back in close to his feet, he gets his butt up in the air, knees off the mat, you can come to the front and then slap on a reverse cradle, and then you tend not to get fancy, try to dump him to his far shoulder to get him off his base and put him on his back. So cradles can be an effective means for stopping or countering stand-up type moves. Also against stand-up, if you happen to have a leg hook ride, as we've demonstrated earlier on the film, you can push on the near arm, circle the near foot, and if opponent is stepping up on his outside foot and working hard to get all the way up, you could take them back to Navy. And we'll just simulate that take to Navy. A couple other counters to stand up if the opponent actually gets to a stand-up position are what we call fujita and the claw move. The fujita. The opponent steps up inside foot, rises to his feet, come around to a perpendicular position, wrap deep at the waist, wrap deep at the rear crotch area, squat, squeeze, pop your hips, and get him airborne. And then if he's leaning forward, you'll be able to step in and do a flying turkey. That's turkey grip. The claw move, somewhat similar. When opponent stands up, inside foot to outside hand, you get around to that perpendicular position. And instead of wrapping the waist deep, you wrap up across his body diagonally and grab far shoulder area, neck and shoulder area. Again, you have the deep insert in the rear crotch. And again, you squat, squeeze, pop your hips, and get him in the air. And now you drop to one knee and lower him down onto his back. The favorite way is if opponent gets to his feet, you can get reach around, wrist grip, and near arm at the elbow area. You can do a simple forward trip. Step across in front of him, knock him down diagonally to the front, post your hand so you don't lose your own balance. If his feet are not under him, his feet are way out to the front where you wouldn't be able to execute the trip, then you can do what we call whirl down. You heel block, put a foot behind a heel, you sit, and you use a half crab to elevate him and rotate him, and you come up on top for control. If, when he's in stand-up and you have that reach around wrist grip and arm, he walks his both feet way out to the front, you might choose to sit and bring him back into a crab ride if you happen to be good with your legs and good with crab ride. If opponent stands and you're unable to get reach around wrist grip and you choose to grab a body lock, then what you'll want to do is squat, squeeze, pop your hips, get him airborne, sweep a leg. Or if his feet are way out to the front, when he stands and you wouldn't be able to lift him, his hips are too low and too far away, then you do a simple cut with your forearm. And you must unlock hands right away as soon as the opponent hits the mat when you do a lift or you do a cut. With body lock versus stand-up, you must have a strong tendency not to pull opponent down backward, whirl down method, and not to trip him forward. Either way, you're very vulnerable to the switch. For example, on a forward trip, when you have a body lock, the opponent could go out and go after a switch. You'd have to circle away and get to an underhook position, get behind both arms, and stay in control. Now, I'm going to mention some general things with regards to stand-up, fighting stand-up. If opponent stands despite your best efforts to stop him, rise with him. Altitude advantage means leverage. Do not give opponent such an advantage. Can't keep him at a disadvantage by keeping him down. At least neutralize his leverage potential by getting up with him. And once up with opponent, proceed properly from there. Make sure you're around behind him sufficiently, and while aggressively seeking to control him, remain alert to his possibilities as well as to what you may know of his tendencies. Get tight to opponent if he stands. Rise and hug. Sufficient tightness will either prevent or slow most of his moves. Since hand control offers opponent his best assured method of escape, become rather adept at combating hand control moves. Some general no-nos with regard to stand-up. Number one, don't let opponent stand. Once he's up, he's at least 80% out if he just has good ability at hand control moves. And also, we don't want to see any feeble attempts at a cradle as the opponent rises. If the opponent's coming up, you don't want to make a feeble attempt. It's either there or it's not there. If it's there, you go for it. If it isn't there, it looks pathetic attempting to go for it. And it usually automatically awards him a point. Once opponent stands, some ride grips are generally insufficient and must be abandoned in order for control to be sustained. For example, wrist back and waist strap is no good. It's too easy for the opponent to do a rip move and get to a neutral. Also, you tend not to insert a grape versus a stand-up. Such a tactic can be dangerous to your own leg or hip if opponent were to try some wingding move. Not exactly knowing what he's doing, but doing something crazy and wild, you can get hurt. If you find yourself in a leg drop position, perhaps the opponent has done a rollover and he puts you in a leg drop position. Do not stop and or hide, for to do so reduces the chances of your effectively completing the leg drop, which should be your immediate thought and act, and it also increases the probability of worse positions for you. So bring your head up and complete the leg drop and regain control in the fullest sense. And tend away from doing anything illegal. For example, no slams. You don't want to pick the guy up in the air and then have him injured on the way down. The rule book says you are responsible for a safe return, so no slams. Penalty could be that you lose the bout. If using body lock versus stand up, however you bring opponent back down to the mat, unlock hands right away. As soon as you hit the mat, you have to separate your hands, otherwise you're going to get penalized. Don't intentionally drive the opponent off and thereby give him a chance at a fresh start. It gives him a breather, gives him time to think, and it gives him an opportunity to start from scratch again. No side trips, or at least tend away from them. They can be legal, but lethal. They are legal, but they tend to be lethal. And don't hang on to opponent to the side. You'll cripple his leg, ruin his career, not just defeat him, but perhaps ruin his career. Opponent stands, maneuvers to the edge, and shows an attitude of wanting to get out of bounds. Don't overly try to resist him. We never jeopardize our own balance through force when potential gain is not vital. Do not ever release opponent near the mat edge prior to the ref's whistle. Make certain you hear the ref's whistle, especially in a tourney where more than one ref is tooting. And never turn your back on an opponent in order to walk back from the out-of-bounds line to the middle, even if you think you heard the ref's whistle before you released them as the two of you went out of bounds. Always figure that it's better to be safe than sorry. If opponent succeeds in standing quickly and getting away, do not charge in as if desperate, unless desperate, simply because perhaps fail to anticipate stand-up and or fail to block or counter it. Do not worsen matters by making a wild charge at him. 1 point is easier to make up than 3 or more. Now we're going to work against switch. First, we'll work against an inside switch when we have a waist and ankle. If you have an ankle when an opponent goes for a switch, you want to get your head up and sprawl the target leg. And then if you circle toward opponent's front, keeping the target leg stretched back the whole time, you can secure a forearm grip and move trail knee in close to opponent in order to impede his recovery of base. And then you proceed from there with aggression to put him on his back. If, on the other hand, the opponent goes after an inside switch against your waist and ankle ride, and he lingers on his hip in a futile switch effort, it may also be possible to circle toward the front and first gain an inside crotch grip, and then go after his head, perhaps a false half Nelson, to ultimately secure an ideal RC. The risk is that he may scoot his hips away and recover base while you're in the process, get himself in neutral. So you have to keep him down on his hip as you work for that ideal RC. Or if you choose to circle toward opponent's rear when he's going for the inside switch, once you're clear of his legs, you can chop him, secure a tight waist drop. You have to watch out for elevator as you chop. Bring knee in close to his butt. Now we're going to show several blocks and counters to the standard switch, the outside switch. Number 1, you want to control the near arm, the non-switch arm. loop that a little bit, control it firmly. He can't go out for the switch. He's got to free his arm. Second item, you want to stretch the target leg and then chop. Stretch the target leg, chop, bring it back down under control. The third way of reacting to a switch attempt is if you anticipate it, you can pivot away from it, change to an underhook. You circle away, get an underhook position. Fourth method, you can pull out, withdraw your arm, that is, and execute a quick bend. The opponent has been going for switch after switch, and you anticipate another one coming, simply withdraw your arm and execute quick bend. Fifth method of blocking or countering a switch attempt would be to do a wing and step over. Now you have to do it either very early or very late, before opponent gets a leg up to block the step over, or at the end of his switch when he's pulling his leg down thinking he's got you. In any event, you just release on the waist, hook his arm, go to your shoulder, do a high step over. So wing action, near side roll action, and step over can be accounted to a switch attempt. And then as a sixth method, you can use your waist strap arm to lift him up into you as you sit under him to gain a crab ride position. You have a waist and arm to start with, and as he starts out for the switch, just use that waist strap to pull him up into your lap as you sit under him, and you end up in crab ride. And as a last resort against a switch, re-switch is always a thought that should be in mind. And you wait till the last split second to execute re-switch. As he goes for the switch and gets it in, and he is hipping away, and looking to come up behind you, just as he rises, you sit under and re-switch. As another counter move to switch, you can sit instead of under him, sit away from him once he gets a switch in, and grab his wrist. And it may be possible to secure a Sullivan ride, which is actually a pin grip. There are moments where you can get the Sullivan via this sit-away move against the switch. We're going to go to some pins now, some pin series that we have. The first one will be back hook pin series. If the opponent allows us to get reach around wrist grip, what we can do is stick a knee in against his lower leg and pull to his hip. And then with our free hand, reach in for an underhook grip on his arm, and give a yank, and then put our chest on that arm so the opponent can't rotate away. And then with our grip on the wrist, we release and we go to his armpit. And we just lower him down toward his shoulders. Now it can happen that he'll rotate in and his arms will position themselves such that we might want to come perpendicular and pin him with what we call standard two upper arms pin grip. The second movement off the back hook, part of the back hook series, we break him down to his hip and we reach in there and do the back hook yank and put our chest on the arm. If the opponent rotates in toward us and or we go for the armpit with our hand and we miss that armpit, we can change to a headlock. As he comes inward toward us, we hit him with headlock grip. So headlock pin grip can come off a back hook as part of the back hook pin series. Now, if the opponent, instead of rotating inward, rotates away, resist going to his back at all. If he rotates toward his stomach, which he shouldn't do, but if he does it, we can change to a tight bar and circle behind him to straddle a bit so he cannot do a counter drag against the tight bar. We would just now, at this point, go into our tight bar series, pin series. If he happens to rotate away properly, that is to his knees, then as he goes back to his knees, we slow him down with arm in the back pressure, And that gives us some time to release on his wrist and take our free hand and go down, grab a knee, and pick that knee up so that we can step in and do a turn. We'll do that last one more time. All right, if we can get the reach around wrist grip, break him down to his side. We reach in and give a yank on the arm, put our body against that arm, and then we go under the armpit, releasing on the wrist, and we ease him down to his back and see if we can't get a pin. If he rotates inward toward us in such a way that we think changing off the two upper arms is something that's worth doing, would be helpful, then we do that. We get perpendicular. If, as we do the yank on the back hook action, the opponent rotates in toward us, or if we miss getting our hand under the armpit, then we go after the head. We go for a headlock as a pin grip. If the opponent rotates away from us rather than inward toward us, and he rotates toward his stomach, then our tendency would be to change to a tight bar, go behind him, and work our tight bar pin series. If the opponent rotates away properly toward his knees, then as he rotates toward his knees, we slow him down with elbow in the back pressure, and then we release on the wrist and go down and get the near knee, scoop it, arc it up in the air so that we can step in properly for Turk and get him on his back with what's called Turk or slow poison. We're going to get fish hook off reach around wrist grip. We sweep the arm in diagonally, get the reach around wrist grip, circle around his butt a bit, reach in and get the fish hook. Our number one thought when we have fish hook is to get a half Nelson and put him over on his back and get chest on chest, up on our toes, a lot of weight on him. If, as we're applying that half Nelson, the opponent tilts his hip in toward us so that we wouldn't be able to rotate him toward his back, we release on a half and reach in and get a back hook grip, keeping the fish hook grip, and we sit our knee under his butt and rock him back into a cheap tilt position, using our free instep or pop instep actually to get under his legs so he can't rotate away. If anytime he's back on his knees and we have that fish hook, we again say that our number one interest is to get the half Nelson. If he tilts his hip in and we get a back hook grip and he resists being rotated over into the cheap tilt, then we would circle toward his feet a little bit and dive under and roll through and put him in the cheap tilt in a fancy manner. One more time from a different angle. If we have reach around wrist grip, gain from waist and arm, we circle the butt and get the fish hook, and we go after the half Nelson, put him on his back. If, when we go for that half Nelson, he tilts his hip in toward us so that we wouldn't be able to rotate it toward his back, even if we got a good half Nelson, then we change to back hook, sit him under him, and rock him up into a cheap tilt position. If he comes back, fighting that, regains base, we're looking for half Nelson because it's more effective as a pin grip than as a cheap tilt. If we have the half Nelson in and he resists the half Nelson, and we go after the back hook and he resists the back hook, that's when we would circle the feet so we don't injure him, and we do a fancy roll under and put him in cheap tilt position. Now if you happen to have the fish hook on the other arm, half Nelson is not availed to you, but forearm is. Push down on the head. If he raises his head up, you go under his face, get forearm, cross face type grip. Pull in on the arm, pull in and up on the leg, and body him with your chest and put him on his back. Chest on chest, up on your toes, feet spread well, and it's an effective pin. If you have that same fish hook grip, and you push down in his head and are able to rock him up into a stack position, you could stack him for the pin. Stack is a very dangerous position, so you have to be careful. If he rolls through the stack position, then you do a cartwheel, get to the other side and start looking for forearm. Circle, get perpendicular, chest on chest, and get him on his back and pin. All right, the next pin series that we'll cover is wrist back pin series, and we'll show 4 moves. 2 of them are complementary to one another, and the other 2 are complementary to one another. Can't get one, you get the other, in other words. The first we'll do is Sullivan. Now, Sullivan is called Sullivan ride or pipe wrench grip. And what you're looking for is head in the armpit and wrist grip, and we call it a wrist back item. So we get the wrist back, we get the head in the armpit, and we break them down to the side, forward, to the side. And as he falls, we look to loosen, release, and get a Sullivan. And once we get that upper arm grip deep, then we start to pry on it, pull it through under him and up, and come parallel and drive our shoulder into his ribs to lower chest. See if we can't get at least near full, if not the pin. If any time you're attempting to get a Sullivan and the opponent resists it, he doesn't let you get your hand in there deep or get it in there at all, then you loosen on his waist and let him rotate toward his stomach. As soon as he gets toward his stomach, you do a duck under at the elbow. Duck your head under at the elbow, sit through, get to a perpendicular position, drive into him, and go after 2 upper arms. Standing 2 upper arms, pin grip. So that's Sullivan and Mills. Mills, the second one that was done there, head underarm pry, we call Mills. If you have wrist back and have him prone on his stomach, and you can get far one-on-one, far wrist bar, what you can do is put the wrist you have alongside him up on your hip and start moving to the front to circle his head. And if you can get your bottom knee on the other side of his head, at that point you want to sit through, release on the wrist, get an underhook, hold on to the near wrist that you had up on your hip, release on the far wrist, and you get what we call a modified screamer. If when you're attempting this so-called hip underarm pry or bucky pin grip, pin maneuver, if your opponent is down on his stomach and he's rising to his knees, as he should, you sit through to the front and do a whip over. Release on the one-on-one and take an underhook because it'll give you more leverage to bring him across your body, and you end up having him in that same modified screamer. On a full screamer, you'd have a double underhook of his arms. Modified screamer, you've got 1 underhook and a wrist in the other hand. We're going to do the drill again from a different angle. If you have an opportunity to get wrist back, that is to get head and armpit, slide your hand down to his wrist, whereby you can drive a little bit with your head, pull back on that wrist, and break him down. As he's falling forward and downward, you look to release and get a Sullivan grip. And with the Sullivan, you pry him over to his back. Just rotate him over. Try to get shoulder into lower chest, upper ribs, and try to bring both his shoulders to the mat. If in your attempt to get the Sullivan, he resists it by rotating toward his stomach, rotating away from the Sullivan attempt, then you loosen on the Sullivan, loosen on his waist, let him rotate toward his stomach, and as he hits his stomach, what you do is you do a duck under his arm at the elbow, better leverage, and then sit through to a perpendicular position and change off to a 2 upper arms tie up as you drive into him. For the bucky or hip underarm pry, you will have his wrist back, you'll have a far one-on-one, far wrist bar, and you'll put his hand up on your hip and start to run to the front to circle his head. When you get the bottom knee on the other side of his head, you release on that one wrist and get an underhook. Keep the other wrist up on your hip. Sit through under his back, and you'll have him in a modified screamer. If in the process of attempting to get the bucky, your opponent rises, he brings his outside knee up, he's starting to come back to base, then you change direction. Sit through, Change to an underhook on the far side and do a Ferris wheel or whip over. Called a Ferris wheel by some, whip over by others, and you'll have them in that modified screamer position, which is an effective